ESO's classes have had a weird year. Subclassing was a huge update, and while everything worked on a technical level, it created problems for power creep, balance, identity. In short, it wasn't finished. And it kinda dulled the vibe for the rest of the year. Players got mad when they didn't get any quick fixes in update 47 or 48, but personally I was hoping the devs had gone quiet because they had something bigger in mind. And thankfully I was right. Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls. Remember to support the channel if you appreciate the content. Thanks. So I posted this video back in May, before subclassing even went live. I'll link the timestamp in the description because I think I was pretty on point with this 6 months ago. I made the case that fixing subclassing would not be quick or easy, and nor should it be. Doing it properly would involve a full class rework, which would be a mountain of work, and I wasn't sure if ZOS would be willing to go that far. But it turns out they are. The combat team just announced that they are on a long-term project to revitalize ESO's classes. Not just nerfs or quick fixes, but a reshuffle of skill lines, a restatement of class identity, visual upgrades, and a promise to put the original pure class loadouts on a closer footing with subclassing. It's a pretty long article, and I've also linked that in the description if you want to check it out. I'm just going to pull out the highlights, react to each section in turn, picking apart the key statements, and indulging in a little healthy speculation as to what it means for this game which has such infuriatingly high potential. Let's get into it. First, the combat team explaining their design philosophy is actually pretty interesting even if it's not headline grabbing. For us, class identity is what makes a class unique and different from other classes. This covers everything from a part of who they are, what they can do, how they look, what they excel at and what they don't excel at. When we look at class identity, we use two core pillars to support the experience: source of power and power fantasy. By source of power, we're referring to what the lore-relevant origin of a class's power is and what might differentiate them from a normal citizen of Tamriel. Questions such as these come up. What caused this person to become a Dragonknight, Arcanist, Sorcerer? What are their motivations? Where do they get their power from? The answers to these questions help inform the way their abilities are developed as an extension of their source of power. What do we mean by power fantasy? Power fantasy takes the source of power a step further and influences how a character receives and is then able to use it. For example, area of effect, damage over time, direct damage, etc. By taking their source of power and putting it into a delivery mechanism, we aim to create the sensation of what it would feel like to be that class. Different power sources shape distinct playstyles. For example, Night Blades rely on cunning and shadow to stay elusive in battle, striking while the moment is right, while Templars draw on divine energy for more zealous and direct combat. These differences help set ESO's classes apart from one another in terms of their identity. It's why some classes have specific power delivery mechanisms that others do not, thus contributing to a more distinct playstyle and establishing a stronger class identity mix. So, very simply, identity is the defining parameters of a class, strengths, weaknesses. Source of power is the in-world explanation for their abilities, and power fantasy is how that is delivered to the player, via ability tooltips, animations, vis effects, and of course the effect we have on enemies and allies. Now, when it comes to nerding out over UX in video games, I'm down. Not just the on-screen stuff, but the psychology too. It's interesting, so I appreciate them elucidating their thinking on this. Also, it's useful for players to have a better handle on what the hell the studio means when they say class identity or power fantasy. Especially if ZOS are going to be more forthcoming and transparent with work-in-progress updates like this. Apparently that is the plan, and I'm here for it. Like I said, nothing earth-shattering in the design philosophy section, but it's at least reassuring to see the core concepts they're working with are pretty similar to what most of us have chalked up after actually playing the game. And if we do get any cranks coming out of the woodwork with super weird takes on how they think this game is supposed to work, we can now point to the developer's own words and say, actually, no. The point here is that subclassing kind of breaks this design philosophy. because it removes restrictions and it takes control away from the devs in crafting that player experience, and gives it to us instead, the players, who have very different goals in mind. The next section addresses that, talking about balance and class identity post-subclassing, and Zos admits there is a conflict here. Subclassing at its core directly competes with our established version of class identity, and instead puts that agency into your hands, giving you the ability to create anything you want. While this is a deeply important part of the feature for us, it also currently comes with some drawbacks for balance. As it stands, subclassing is objectively stronger than pure classing by a large margin for several reasons. This is mostly caused by the vast differences in individual skill line designs. ESO was not built from launch with subclassing in mind, and the system highlighted issues with the current class skill line design that were not previously a factor but are untenable going forward. One overarching pattern you'll see as we move towards improving this experience is reorganizing class skill lines, adding in more benefits for sticking with the core skill lines of your class, and decentralizing role-specific power so that a single skill line would have every tool you need to achieve your goals. Our aim isn't necessarily to nerf though. While in some instances nerfs may be necessary, we'll be using values and specific effects to create more powerful or punchy abilities and passives, but with greater nuances that prevent subclassing from completely dominating the meta. What we aim to achieve is twofold. For those who prefer to play a pure class, you should have a strong and satisfying class identity and the power you need to achieve your goals. For those who wish to dive into subclassing, you should feel the freedom to forge your own identity or even forego identity for the sake of specialized power, but with less of a difference in power compared to the pure class options. The obvious good news here is that the devs recognize the problems they created with subclassing. It does undermine class identity. It kinda puts pure classes out of business, and it narrowed the meta because some skill lines are packed with useful stuff, while others look extremely meh by comparison. And while I'd guess that some nerfs are inevitable, it says later in the article that our goal is to keep the relative level of power players have now, and we will work to maintain that within reason moving forward. Whether that's the current power of a pure class or a subclass character is not clear, but anyway, the primary purpose is to reshuffle the skill lines so there's more of a mix of damage and support abilities across the board. That should go a long way to alleviate most of subclassing's problems in both PvP and PvE, just as I argued over 6 months ago. And I would guess that this class refresh initiative probably started taking shape at around the same time, if not earlier. Now, even if they don't directly nerf that many abilities, a reshuffle will almost certainly mean a DPS loss. Remember, the crazy power spike from subclassing didn't come from abilities being buffed. There was some of that, sure, but it was the fact that power was concentrated in certain skill lines, and those are the ones we picked. If power is more evenly distributed, we can't do that anymore, so we should inevitably lose some offensive power even if nothing gets nerfed directly. Now, some players hate losing access to damage no matter what the reason, and I guess if you're primarily a score pusher, I can fully understand that. It sucks to know that you can never beat your previous score because the goalposts have been moved. But at the same time, that is a pretty tiny portion of the player base, and the overall health of PvE is a higher priority. ESO has a growing problem with difficulty, or a lack of difficulty, where it feels, at least to me, like the game wants to be super accessible, but it also wants a combat system which is deep, dynamic and interesting, and it wants enough beefy challenges to sustain a healthy endgame scene. Ticking all 3 of those boxes is kind of a tall order, and the game is currently not doing it. A class refresh obviously won't be enough on its own, but it could be an important step in the right direction. And speaking of direction, Zos also lay out their long-term vision for ESO's classes. 1. Every class will be viable in any role. To us, viability means players can reach their goals with the choices offered. This does not necessarily mean equally optimal, but always providing multiple choices for you. Okay, so while we're on this subject, I just want to say, as someone who used to make DPS guides for all 14 classes every single patch, and who has DPS'd, tanked, and healed on every class over the years, I can tell you the big chunks of the ESO community have a very poor sense of what's viable and what isn't. It's true that in recent years ZOS seemed to be trying to move everything together in terms of DPS parity, and then something like hybridization or the Arcanist comes along and throws everything out of whack again. But there's always been this idea, very popular in the mid-game, that certain classes cannot do certain things. Necromancer sucks at damage, Dragonknight sucks at healing, or Templar sucks at tanking. This is just ignorance. The reason some classes are almost always left on the shelf is simply that a different class is just stronger, not necessarily by a massive amount, or that they have something specific that the group needs, like minor toughness or stagger. But if we don't understand why the more experienced groups aren't fielding certain classes, this perception just becomes magnified by cumulative bias, inertia, and out-of-date information, to the point where people might even kick an awesome player from their group because they brought the wrong class. Still, it would be cool to shake up class representation in different roles, and if they could do more to address single target damage versus AoE damage, either so access to cleave damage is a bit more universal, or so single target loadouts pull further ahead in the sort of fights where they really ought to excel, that might also make the meta less stale. But it's not just about DPS. You could also make the case that direct damage has been too dominant for too long, for example, and that sustain also feels too uneven between skill lines now that they're all interchangeable. 2. We want each class to feel cohesive and true to its power fantasy, with abilities, animations, and audio effects that reinforce its core identity. This means refreshing and modernizing abilities so they look and feel as impactful as those of more recently introduced classes like the Arcanists. Now, the idea that base game classes like Sorcerer or Nightblade might get their visuals and sound effects jazzed up to compete with the Arcanist, I bet that's exciting for a lot of people. I once made an entire video on this stuff and how crucial it is in making each class feel unique and engaging to play. So it could be a big deal in making ESO more fun moment to moment. Just keep in mind that they might only be talking about a few skills here and there, and there's no guarantee you'll even like the new versions to begin with. We can be very funny when it comes to change. I just hope ZOS learned something from Rapid Strikes, whose updated animation is still almost universally disliked. 3. We're committed to evolving our design philosophies by using player feedback and in-game data to help guide class updates. As we address balance concerns and update class mechanics, our goal is to ensure that every class feels good to play, both mechanically and thematically, while keeping the unique flavor that sets each apart. This is just ZOS saying that their first shot at class revitalization might not be perfect. They'll keep working on it and will try to listen to us. Then there's a little more about the goals they're going to try to stick to throughout this exercise. Strengthen the unique identities of each class, making them feel fun and rewarding, as well as thematically unique and engaging to play. Improve the balance between pure classing and subclassing so both paths have their place in the game. Make each class's skill lines more varied and distinct for what they offer a role, so that each skill line holds something valuable regardless of what you play. Use both in-game data and player feedback to help inform our decisions, ensuring changes reflect player experiences and preferences. Address power outliers in abilities and skill lines, and look at balance concerns as we progress through each of the classes, prioritizing mathematical and functional changes before visual and audio updates. All sounds fine to me. By the way, if you guys noticed that this article is quite lengthy and detailed, that's not a coincidence. It feels to me like ZOS saw the widespread frustration with update 47 and 48, no real fixes to subclassing, and no mention of it even, except a brief comment from Gina, and they saw a need to put their cards on the table. I even wonder if this started out as an internal document. In places, it kinda reads like a design brief, which has been tweaked and reframed for public use. Whatever the case, I hope this transparency can continue and the devs can take their time with this stuff and just do it right. That's probably easier to do when you're being open about it, and it feels like the stakes are high after the long limbo we've been in after subclassing, and the fact that 2025 wasn't the slam dunk it should have been. On that point of taking their time, the article does say that this is a major comprehensive initiative that will span several updates. We are prioritizing classes that require the most modernization and balance work first. For some classes, this will be an exercise in refinement. For others, it will mean a more thorough reconfiguring, and for some classes, it may be a mix of both. As we get closer to beginning work on each class, we'll go into deeper detail with regular updates about the upcoming changes. Each class will be addressed one at a time and receive impactful mechanical and balance changes in addition to any needed updates to visuals and audio. We're starting with the Dragonknight class as the anchor, given its foundational role and the extent of changes needed. These class-by-class updates will run alongside ongoing support for the game, and timelines may shift as needed. The expected order is Dragonknight, Warden, Sorcerer, Templar, Nightblade, Necromancer, Arcanist. And here's a chart which lays out the current descriptions of Source of Power and Power Fantasy for each class. There's a high-res version linked in the description if you want to take a closer look, but there's nothing too surprising in there. The Warden Power Fantasy does make it sound like a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none kind of deal, and I hope they can refine that. And the Nightblade Power Fantasy still revolves around stealth, which has always bugged me, because there's really just one ability in the entire Nightblade toolkit that has anything to do with stealth, and the vast majority of Nightblade gameplay has nothing to do with stealth. Even before subclassing, plenty of Nightblades in PvP never bothered with the cloak, and in PvE it's never really been a thing except recently when they tried to crowbar it into the rotation. I think it's a typical example of ESO trying to lean into certain tropes to be enticing and familiar to the fantasy RPG crowd, but these tropes have little or nothing to do with the actual combat experience. But I will admit, some of the classes are difficult to sum up in a pithy little capsule like this. Anyway, clearly this is going to be the big priority for the combat team going forward, which suggests that maybe we shouldn't hold our breath for major new developments like a new class or a new skill line in 2026. I don't know that many players are expecting anything like that anyway, and who knows, maybe ZOS will surprise us with a revamped Dark Brotherhood skill line or something. For now, they say, we'll also continue working on regular bug fixing and performance updates as normal. Our goal is to keep the relative level of power players have now, and we will work to maintain that within reason moving forward. While we won't focus on large balance changes outside of ability line refreshes and subclassing balance, we'll continue to monitor feedback and adjust values for balance on other aspects of gameplay as needed. We're currently looking into ways to alleviate some of the long-standing community concerns with both pure classing and subclassing in the short term, as well as underlying broader issues and feedback. Finally, the most tantalizing part, a sneak peek at some of the changes they're already working on for the Dragonknight. Dragonknights are attrition warriors. There will be many adjustments that help reforge this experience, including unique damage over time parameters like shorter durations, higher damage per tick, and ramping effects that let them build their power over the course of a fight. Another area this has improved is with the new Avalanche passive in Earthen Heart, which allows you to slowly build up momentum with a stacking damage bonus while in combat that can be lost if you fail to keep up the pressure. Dragonknight's flames are ravenous and demand fuel. Dragonknights are designed to require careful resource management, creating the feeling that their flame always needs fuel. This also helps balance the class, preventing them from dominating long battles simply by outlasting their opponents. While we still believe in this design philosophy, we've also tried to build more satisfying methods of solving those problems inside their class kit, like reworked Inhale, which has moved to Ardent Flame and now briefly restores a percent of your missing resources over time before unleashing its classic explosion. It's not a lot, and I don't want to read too much into it, but there are a few details here that jumped out at me. First, a commitment to the idea that Dragonknights are a slow burn damage class. Maybe slow isn't the best word, but they generally rely on layering dots more than, say, a sorcerer or an arcanist. The reference to shorter, fatter dots also sounds encouragingly like they're planning to walk back some of the changes from update 35, where sticky dots became very long in duration and very weak in damage per second. The idea was to simplify rotations in PvE, but it was the start of a trend which made dots not worth using in many situations. Many people have pointed out that reversing this trend would be a neat way to counter the dominance of Fatecarver. While direct damage is king, there's not much downside in channeling a beam of damage all the time. But if dots were more powerful, the inability to juggle them effectively alongside the long channel would make Fatecarver less appealing, unless you wanted a simpler rotation and didn't mind having lower DPS. Ramping effects that build up power over the course of a fight sounds like it ticks the class identity box from the start of the article, which was all about classes or skill lines being more closely defined by strengths and weaknesses. And adding what sounds like a powerful damage passive to the Earthen Heart skill line looks like a concrete example of spreading out damage and support power between all skill lines. We also get an explanation of why Dragonknight Sustain has always been so quirky, to create the feeling that the flame always needs fuel. I don't think I've ever heard the devs put it that way before. And an example of a reworked ability, Inhale, which sounds like you could keep cycling it like a short buff, maybe cast it between trash balls for resources and to time a burst of damage. We'll have to wait until early 2026 to hear more. So there's quite a lot to think about here. It's hard to conceive of a more fundamental way to mess with the game than reworking its classes, and if it's done poorly or rushed, this could obviously be a disaster. But so far, it sounds positive, and if done really well, it might even coax back some of those players who took a break from ESO after subclassing launched. It would be dumb to give the devs too much credit when they haven't released anything yet, but I see 3 reasons to be cautiously optimistic. 1. The Dragonknight changes sound positive, such as they are. 2. The transparency here is very welcome. But most importantly, 3. When I saw the turmoil wrought by subclassing on the class system, I made the point that if time, resources and money were no obstacle, this would be a great excuse to do a rework of ESO's classes. I hoped the devs would see it the same way, and that we might get some version of that. And when I saw the lack of changes in update 47 and 48, those hopes did rise slightly. But I'm a realist, and I feel like game studios, especially those owned by big publishers, aren't exactly encouraged to noodle around with their combat systems after 11 years. So the fact that we seem to be getting a genuine overhaul, as well as visual and UX improvements that it never even occurred to me to hope for, that suggests a willingness to tackle and fix this stuff and actually make the game better. Like I said, it's way too early to drink the Kool-Aid, obviously, but it is encouraging. What do you think? Please do let me know in the comments, or on the Ninja Balls Discord, or stop by Twitch while we're streaming and let's talk about it. I want to say a huge thank you to our supporters, large and small. It's been an incredibly busy year, and without you guys, none of this would have happened. Let's do even better and greater things in 2026. And with that, I'll leave you to daydream about the shiny new things that your favorite class might be getting next year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.